Red Allen's style was fully formed by 1930. Louis Armstrong hovered in its background, but Allen's originality dominated it. It was an elegant, fearless style, and it was perfectly balanced. His full, often declamatory tone was crimped by growls or piercing high notes. His basically legato approach was enlivened by rushes of on-the-beat notes. His seemingly straightforward melodic content was enriched by long, sagacious phrases and by daring choices of notes. Allen was particularly striking at slow tempos. He would linger over his notes, holding them far longer than any other trumpeter, and he would bend them and press them, coloring them with a distinct and disturbing melancholy. His slow solos were often requiems, but this sadness, which lifted at faster tempos, was invariably toughened and guided by a subtle, leashed power. By 1934, he had become a full-fledged innovator. Indeed, in the recordings he made with Fletcher Henderson, he is a one-man avant-garde. His solos are full of long, roving lines, unexpected off-notes, and free rhythmic turns. It is a sort of crossing-the-bar lines improvising that was perfected 5 or 6 years later by Lester Young and Charlie Christian, and that still sounds absolutely fresh. Some of Allen's solos with Henderson had such completeness and authority that they were studied a few years later by Harry James when he was with Benny Goodman, and several were scored for the whole sections of the Henderson Band. Allen's playing changed in the 40s. It became brassy and harsh, and his unevenness, theretofore occasional, had become pronounced. He would start a solo with a beautiful languorous phrase, pause, lose the impetus of it, and wander off into an entirely different mood. But this uncertainty began to lessen in the early 50s, and in 1957 he made a startling record for Victor. It included several long ballads, and Allen converted each into a massive lullaby. He sounded like Art Farmer and Miles Davis. He flowed around his horn. Lower register notes, almost trombone notes, would be planted beside soft, high flutters, and the blues underlay almost every passage. He made equally good recordings after that, and gorgeous patches appeared in every solo he took in nightclubs or at concerts, no matter how hard he was blowing. 1967, age 59. For the last 27 years of his life, he lived with his wife, Pearlie Mae, and assorted children and grandchildren on the 5th floor of a yellow brick walk-up on Prospect Avenue in the East Bronx. Jobs were scarce in the year or two before he died, and he welcomed visitors and friends. Allen sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his legs spread wide, his toes pointing in. His face was a study in Basset melancholy. He had a high, narrow forehead and thin, dark hair. A single, iron-bound furrow ran across the lower part of his forehead, and it seemed to weigh his eyes, which were heavily lidded and slanted down at their outer corners. 2 deep furrows bracketed his generous nose and his mouth, and he had a cleft chin. His cheeks were heavy but firm. His smile was surprising. It easily lifted and lit the mass around it. His speech was full of New Orleans oddities. He was apt to start sentences with "der" in the manner of the French "donc," or to use it to fill a pause, and he pronounced rehearsal and bird, rehearsal and Boyd. Allen yawned, tweaked his nose, and rested his thick, square hands on his thighs. My first visit to New York was when King Oliver called for me to come and meet him, Allen said. I was leery of leaving New Orleans. I'd heard of too many New Orleans musicians getting stranded up in the north. But I went because Oliver had worked in my dad's brass band. I lived in a boarding house with Omer Simeon and Barney McGard and Paul Barber and New Orleans friends, and all in Oliver's band before I moved in with Oliver and his sister.